Hello and welcome to the Melbourne AWS User Group episode 109, I think we're up to now. Apologies for the delayed start. I think my Intel Mac knows that its days are numbered and is going to go down kicking and screaming all the way. It's now, oh geez, probably 18 months into this pandemic, and finally there's actually light at the end of the tunnel for the end of this week, so hooray! Um, in theory, we could be able to hold next month's meetup in person, but that relies on dates lining up exactly right and us finding venues and all sorts of other things that need to go correctly. So I think at this point we'll just call it where it is, and say that the call it where it is and say that November's meetup will be virtual as well, and then we'll start to lock in our in-person events in from January onwards. Excellent. All right, so let's get going on our evening tonight. Shove over this way. Oh, it's the other side now. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, the Melbourne AWS User Group acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Our agenda for tonight, doing the introductions right now. Obviously, we're a little bit behind schedule, so we'll try and push through these as fast as we can. Straight up after me is the news with Ian and JM. Our first presenter tonight is Dawn, with a look back on Control Center, 12 months after the last talk that Dawn gave on Control Center. Actually, I think it might be 14 or 15 months, but either way, it'd be interesting to see how Product Corp is going. Our second presenter tonight is Matt, who will be taking a look at the Smarter Contact Center experience with Voice ID and Wisdom. Wisdom is something I could use a lot of right now, so I'm really looking forward to this one too. If you're just joining us for the first time tonight, welcome along. The way our format usually works here is we encourage you to ask questions via text, either in Slack on the #Melbourne channel, on Twitter using the AWS Melb hashtag, or right there in the chat on YouTube. At the end of the presentation, myself or Ian, who you'll meet shortly, will jump on the stream with the presenter, and we'll ask those questions on your behalf. We always encourage comments and feedback at all times via those same three channels. Okay. Our gold sponsor for 2021, the second half of 2021, is CMD. And our silver sponsors are Versant and Civo. A big thanks to all three of them. There's no way we could put these events on month in, month out without their support. So big thanks to them. So a little bit about who are we. My name is Rob, or I'm at Bok on most social media. And my co-host, who you'll meet in a moment, is Ian. We don't work for AWS. We're members of this community, the same as everybody else, which gives us a lot of advantages and independent thoughts and those sorts of things that we can bring. And again, the same goes for everybody else. We welcome all opinions about AWS in this community, good, bad, ugly, whatever they might be. So please, as long as we keep the chat nice and civil, we can express any opinions we like about AWS here. Best place to do that and to get involved in our community is on the Slack team. The URL just there. It's a great place to ask for questions if you're stuck, to complain in general about the quality of some of AWS's products. And there's also a jobs channel, some volunteers channel, and some automated announcement channels like the AWS outages channel and the announcement channel. If you'd like to get involved in the community, we're always looking for speakers. Finding speakers is very much the hardest part of putting these events on. And we're always looking for volunteers as well. Sponsorship is closed for this year, but we're getting close to the end of the year, so we'll be talking about that again soon. Now, the only other thing that we've got on coming up is reInvent. And it seems actually like if you do want to go and re-event, there are still tickets available, and you might just be able to get there. There's no word at the moment as to whether you'd be able to get back again, but you might be able to get there. Either way, if you want to watch reInvent, either from Vegas itself or from online, like I'll be doing, jump on the reinvent.awsevents.com website and register your interest, so you make sure you get the link to the live streams and opt out of the marketing materials bit too, because that's quite extensive. All right, so with that out of the way, we'll move on to our look back at what's new with AWS with Ian and JM.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. And hello, everyone. And with me again is JM.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining.
And as Rob said, we're a bit behind schedule. We'll probably go through the news a bit faster than usual, or at least we'll attempt to. Maybe we'll get sidetracked. So let's get started with finally in Sydney. First, Mac instances. To be clear, these are not the ones that will replace Rob's Intel Mac that gave us so much trouble today. But it is good that we have them. A couple months ago, we had a good presentation about using it with Jenkins builds. And I'm guessing that they can now restructure their setup and use the instances here.
So yeah, for that, you need to have a Mac Metal. So it's a dedicated host that you need to kind of hook to yourself. It's $1.35 an hour here in Sydney, and $0.08 in USD. So it's a bit, we have an Australian tax in this one. You need to use it minimum for 24 hours. So that increases the price as well when you want to play with it. And you can do saving plans to save around 44%. But if you want to run one here in Australia for the month, then that's $1,000 a month. After 2 months, you can buy one yourself. But it's for testing, so it's pretty cool. You end up with 12 CPU and 32 gig memory and a nice EBS. So with 25 gig network performance. So it's a good machine.
And the other thing we got, which happened pretty quickly, is MemoryDB for Redis. This was just announced, I think, 2 months ago that it came out.
Yeah.
Elsewhere. And it is basically as the name says, a memory stored DB database that is Redis compatible.
Yeah, so you have much more control than Elasticache. Obviously, the instances are much bigger as well. It's quite more expensive. And then you can see on the website when they launch it, Netflix and Twilio are the main users of that service. So I believe that has been a big push from this big customer from AWS point of view to get that new service going, and much more reliable and high availability across multiple AZ for production environment than Elasticache, apparently.
Cool. And on the serverless side, I think the big news here, which was announced the day after last month's meetup, is that Lambda functions can now run on Graviton. We've spoken about Graviton plenty of times. So basically, it's an ARM-based system. And basically, that has no impact if you run things like JavaScript or Python, or even for your Java and other Lambda functions. Everything should just work. You may need to recompile if you use something like Go. But in general, this is a very easy way to get some savings in.
Yeah, so you might need to upgrade a little bit your runtime. This version support only for both Python 3.8 and 3.9 and Java 8 and 11. But no, it's pretty cool. And you can, just click, modify your Lambda, and then your code can work on ARM now and save 20%.
Yeah, which is awesome if you have more than $1 worth of Lambda build.
Yes.
The other big thing here is probably that Step Functions now supports over 200 AWS services. So until this announcement, Step Functions supported, I think, 17 services. So in one go, they added a lot of them. Most likely, this is because of the new CLI that we'll mention in a bit, or CLI command, the cloud control. But it's still really cool and allows you to do a lot more with Step Functions.
Yeah, you can almost integrate now all the AWS services and make them orchestrated through a Step Function. You can use as well up to 9,000 capabilities through the SDK. So it's really, you can orchestrate almost everything.
Let's have a look at containers then.
Yep.
For CDK lovers, CDK, I have no idea how you're supposed to pronounce this.
CDK?
CDKs, yep. ASGA. This is basically the CDK version that instead of allowing you to build your AWS infrastructure, allows you to configure your Kubernetes clusters. So basically, it generates all the control files that you may have for Kubernetes. It has also been adopted by the CNCF, so it's not a pure AWS project anymore, which shows that it is much more likely to be widely adopted and going to be used. So that's pretty cool.
So you can go to GitHub CDKs-team. You can see the roadmap. People are, asking for other languages at the moment. TypeScript, JavaScript, Python, Java, and Go is supported, but there will be more languages coming. And it's great that is part of CNCF. Yeah.
Cool. In the interest of time, we'll skip all the rest here and just go to DevOps. I already mentioned it earlier, the Cloud Control API, which is a new API. It is built into the AWS CLI, so you can just go AWS Cloud Control. And what this does is it offers you a interface that is the same for all services. So it's basic CRUD type stuff. So create, place, update, delete. All those things. So pretty cool. We mentioned it before.
Yeah, so with single API name, you can do get resource, and then you ask the type of resource you want instead of having, describe EC2 and stuff like that. So with simple commands now you can. However, I found the disaster state, which is basically almost the parameters inside a CloudFormation, that to be quite long and probably hard to read in the current state. So, but one single product, one simple command, and now support with HashiCorp and Pulumi to be able to write social as code, and then your CLI command. You need to upgrade to 2.3.0 for your AWS CLI, but yeah, it's working.
Yeah,
did a couple of tests.
It does seem to have moved the complexity a bit from figuring out which command to use to figuring out how to structure the JSON payload that you have to give it.
Yeah.
But for certain things, it's definitely a big improvement.
And you rely in the background in CloudFormation public registry, so you can publish yourself stuff, and then even your code or your CloudFormation template could be used through that Cloud Control create resource option. So you can distribute stuff now through that process as well with the CloudFormation public registry. So there are more to come, I think. That will be interesting to see.
On the security side, nothing major, I think, except Security Hub cross-region aggregation. So you can now collect everything into your single security hub if you use multiple regions. So that's nice.
So across multiple regions, across multiple accounts, so you can have now a dedicated environment where to see all your security hub alerts. So that's very useful. Yes. And another one to note, I guess, some customers who are regulated, the AWS Backup Vault lock, where it works a bit like the Glacier lock, when you can have a worm, so write once, read many backup environment, and you can set up a lock. You have a grace period of 3 days or less to be able to lock your vault, and then you can enforce retention periods and retention days as well. So very useful to guarantee that your backup cannot be deleted by mistakes or by hackers or something. Yeah. So a lot of new improvement in the backup environment on AWS with the audit manager as well.
Cool. Then another cool stuff. Everybody, of course, has been waiting for Outposts with VMware.
Not sure about this one.
So yeah. It was actually part of the initial announcement of Outposts. So that was almost 3 years ago now, I feel like. Was it 2? I don't know. A long time ago when Outposts was first announced, sometime before the constant lockdowns. So it now finally showed up. So if you're
it's a full service. So if you have an Outpost and you want to put VMware on top, you can't do that. You need to start again the old process. It's a full service offered by VMware and AWS. So you order an Outpost and then VMware install the product on it, and then you have the full product, right? So it can take 4 to 6 weeks. I couldn't find any pricing anywhere, but it's probably not very palatable for our local customers. Yeah. And you cannot share it with other stuff, right? So you can't run EC2 instance and S3 on your Outpost as well. It's dedicated and owned by VMware basically and managed by them. So that could be useful for people who need stuff local and still want to use VMware, but why bother? Panorama appliances. It's an appliance where you can connect IP cameras and run some application code on it and run some detection models locally. You need to buy the appliance. It's $4,000 and then there is a fee per month per cameras to be able to use it. And then S3 obviously on top, only available in US, Canada, and Europe at the moment.
Yep. But with that, I think we'll call it done. Move to the main part. Reminder, Jen, Guy, and I will discuss all of this news in more detail, including all the stuff we just skipped over, and do it in podcast form. That will show up soon. And with that, I hand it back to Rob to introduce our next speaker.
Enjoy the night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Guy. That was as insightful as ever. I am really looking forward to switching all my Lambdas over to Gravitron. It will save me no cents because I pay no cents, but it'll run faster, and that's the main thing. So our first speaker tonight, as mentioned in the intro, is Dawn, who doesn't really need an introduction. Dawn has presented many times throughout lockdown for us, and we're very grateful. Thank you. One of the presentations was from June last year, I think it was, which introduced us to Product Corp and their use of Control Tower. And now we get to look back in and see how they're doing after 12 months. So without further ado, we'll switch over now.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Once again, we are looking at AWS Control Tower, and it's not really 12 months on, is it? Because I think it was actually about August or September last year that I did the original presentation. But this is a look at AWS Control Tower 12 and a bit months on. First off, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land I am presenting tonight. This is and always will be Aboriginal land. Their sovereignty was never ceded. Yeah, I probably don't need an introduction by now, but on the off chance that there are people here who haven't seen the introduction before, my name is Dawn. I'm now doing cloud security and DevOps at Enabler. Goodness me, I do move around a lot, and Enabler is hiring. And my approach to handling AWS environments is effectively, the more AWS accounts, the better. Spin them down, bring them back up again, configure them, leave them as sandboxes for people to work in. Outside of work, I am an occasional author and kitchen alchemist. Sometimes that ends really well, sometimes it doesn't. I am also a raging sports ball fan, which is why I rotate through pictures of me doing or wearing sports ball-y things. So a little bit over 12 months ago, we met Product Core. And yes, it is pronounced Product Core, even though it's spelt Product Corp, because startups and NAF want to use anything they possibly can to differentiate themselves. So let's meet Product Core yet again. Let's have a little refresher on what they're actually doing. So this is a startup. Their head office is in Sydney, and Product Core's primary market is in e-commerce software. So they have two flagship products. They've got Buy It, which is an inventory management software as a service platform, which connects with Sell It, their other flagship product, which is effectively a managed online shopping platform similar to Shopify. And everything that Product Core does is targeted towards the Australian market, being that they're a startup with their head office in Sydney, and their infrastructure runs on AWS, which is very important for what we're looking at here. They've been in business for about 7 years, and they're starting to hit the scale where they've got a bit of money to play around with as a result of investments now. And they've been using other payment processors and have decided that they want to cut out the middleman. And so they have gone out and bought a payments processing company called FlyMoney. And the process of merging all of FlyMoney's workloads into Product Core's existing setup will be headed up by Ben Nguyen, who we have met before, but they've been promoted since the last time we talked. They're now Product Core's head of engineering. And they're very passionate about improving infrastructure in general. They've got over 10 years of experience, so they're quite looking forward to seeing what they can learn from FlyMoney systems. Spoiler, probably not going to be what you think it is. You know, they've mainly worked with startups before, so they're very familiar with this sort of running AWS at a small scale and scaling it up. And in terms of the way that Product Core's AWS accounts are set up, unlike when we checked in with them a bit over 12 months ago, it's actually quite sensible. So they've got everything split out into separate organizational units, and because they don't have too many products, it's split out basically according to the production life cycle. So they've got prod, pre-prod, dev, and lab. And for each of their services that they're running, they have individual prod, pre-prod, and dev accounts for those. And for microservices, some of them are split out into separate accounts as well. They've also got one lab account per team, basically a sandbox where people can go in and play around with things. And their account management and guardrails, that's all done with Control Tower. A couple of interesting things to note, though. All of Product Core's workloads run in AP Southeast too. And that's going to be important later. The other thing that's important to note is that their access to AWS is controlled via SSO, which is backed by an identity provider. So things like Azure AD, Okta, I know there are a few others. Google Workspace, unfortunately, doesn't quite work for this because it's only got about a quarter of the features of a full-fledged IDP. But it's very easy to basically plug your IDP into AWS and have that manage SSO for you. And that's what Product Core are currently doing. Now, FlyMoney's AWS accounts, unfortunately for poor Ben, are a bit of a different beast. Their head office is actually in Melbourne, so they are an Australia-based company, but their primary market is sort of emerging markets. So they operate primarily in Europe, but also in Africa and South America. And that means that their workloads are running across a total of 7 different AWS regions. When it comes to the accounts, though, it's a bit of a wild west. Not only do they have not really any particular controls over what can be deployed into their accounts, they've only got 3 of them, and they don't really have clear boundaries about what goes where. I'm sure everyone at this point is starting to quietly groan to themselves. What's even worse, though, is that their access is all managed by IAM users, and I'm sure I don't need to go over again why that's a problem, particularly for a payment processing company. So Ben's a bit worried at the end of this meeting where everything is handed over to them, and they get on the phone to Mari Novotná. And she's been promoted as well since we last checked in with her. She's now Product Core's security lead. And by the time that this phone call is finished, she's starting to get the feeling that she was sold a bit of a lemon, because she was told that FlyMoney had excellent AWS governance. And so she, with her multiple AWS security certs, is currently a little bit cross. So they meet with Annie Jones, who we've also met before, which is interesting because she used to work for an auditing firm. And so of all of the people that work at Product Core, she is the one that is most familiar with auditing processes, which is one of Ben and Mari's first concerns. And she has absolutely no idea how FlyMoney ever passed a PCI audit, because it's quite easy. Once you've got, if you've got PCI workloads that are properly isolated, it's quite easy to be able to deploy other stuff to AWS accounts and use some interesting attack vectors that you can't use from outside the eco or from outside that individual account. So there's an emergency meeting called with basically all of the C-suite in it, and Ben and Mari are given full blessing to go in and do whatever they need to do to fix up the situation with the FlyMoney AWS accounts. And they're going to fall back to the tried and true maxim of using existing patterns and things that you already know you can get working, which in this case is AWS Control Tower. So Ben and Mari's new plan is actually fairly similar to Ben and Mari's old plan when we first checked in with them a little bit over 12 months ago. So the first thing that they're going to do, with a little bit of fiddling around with enrolling and unenrolling from organizations, is get all of FlyMoney's accounts into the Product Core AWS organization isolated into one OU. And then they're going to take that existing OU and they are going to enroll it into Control Tower. Once they've done that, which at least gives them some basic governance, then they've got to do the legwork that Control Tower enables you to do around splitting workloads out into multiple AWS accounts and actually making sure that they've got the structure in there that would allow them to pass a PCI audit without telling too many small fibs. The other thing that they really want to do here is get rid of all of the IAM users, and their plan to do that is all of the FlyMoney employees have been issued with Product Core email addresses. So they're just going to migrate all of those logins into the Product Core IDP and have everything accessible via AWS SSO. And the new FlyMoney accounts are going to follow very much that same sort of split, separate accounts for each of the 7 regions, 1 production and pre-prod account per region, 1 dev account per service per region. And those will have region restrictions as well on deployments, because then it means if someone goes in and breaches FlyMoney's operations in South America, they don't necessarily get into everything else, and the old 1 lab account per team. Now, the interesting thing here is that a lot has changed in Control Tower in the past 12 months and change. And if Product Core had acquired FlyMoney 12 months ago, they would have been faced with a very different proposition in terms of solving this problem for a few different reasons. The first one is that 12 months ago, Control Tower had only just made it to Sydney, and that was actually, Sydney was in the first 5 regions to get access to Control Tower. And Product Core, FlyMoney operates in a bunch of regions which Control Tower wasn't available in 12 months ago. So that's actually quite a big change, which has enabled this to happen. It's now available in 15 of the 21 AWS regions, so well over half. And another big change that has happened is you can now select which regions you want to be governed with Control Tower. Before, it was effectively all or nothing, and every time new regions were released, you had to upgrade Control Tower. The 6 regions that Control Tower is not available in are Cape Town, so Africa South 1, and Bahrain, Middle East. The thing with those 2 is there's actually no other AWS regions in those areas. But for Europe, Asia Pacific, and America, EU South 1, US West 1, AP East 1, and AP Northeast 3, the vast majority of companies that are using AWS in those regions are probably going to be using regions now that are covered by Control Tower. I did mention, though, that one of Fly Money's markets was Africa. So when the Cape Town region was released, which was fairly recently, actually, Fly Money immediately rushed to move all of their workloads into AF South 1, which is a bit of a problem for them because that's one of the 6 regions that's not covered by Control Tower at the moment. Fortunately for Ben and Mari, there is actually a workaround here, because although Control Tower actions don't happen in regions where Control Tower hasn't been deployed yet, Control Tower itself as a solution is actually backed by Service Catalog, and that means that you can get lifecycle events out of it. And AWS has really kindly written up a whole blog post on how you can use those lifecycle events and other AWS services. Basically, by subscribing to the lifecycle events, you can then replicate a lot of Control Tower's workflows by triggering off other services. And that's a pattern. If you're interested in having other things, basically automation built on top of Control Tower, that's actually a pattern that you can build on as well. So I definitely recommend, if you're interested in Control Tower, check out that blog post. It's in the sources. And as we sort of covered earlier, when you spin up Control Tower, it's not an all or nothing thing anymore, but you do also have the ability to deselect regions. So if Fly Money and Ben and Mari effectively decide that they only want to have Control Tower govern the regions that they're actually operating in, they can do that. They can just go in and manually remove all of the other regions where they don't operate. I'm not necessarily advocating that as a good idea, but if you want regions unenrolled from Control Tower for particular reasons, that's something you can do. Now, guardrail updates. Not a lot has changed here, but a lot of the changes that have happened are actually quite impactful. One of which we'll sort of cover the implications of later, but there have been updates to the IAM guardrails around protecting Control Tower resources, which was set up that way to enable enrollment of existing OUs. There have also been a number of updates to guardrail names and descriptions to clarify what they actually do, which is something when I was first testing this out last year, I actually got caught out by. So that's quite a nice change. And another change that's happened is around the log archive account that's provisioned for governance. It used to be that anything around S3 buckets and CloudTrail you just couldn't do anything with, and that was mandatory, that there were locks on there to disable configuration changes. But that's been changed now. So if you want to do other things in the log archive account where you do want people to be able to go and change them, that's now an elective guardrail, so you can opt in or opt out of that. So that is good in the sense that it enables you to do a lot more with the log archive account and to decide how you want to actually operate that, which is something you couldn't have done before. The OU changes are a pretty big one, and as we see from the IAM guardrail changes, when I looked at this 12 months ago, you would have to go in and create your own organizational units to get things to work with Control Tower and then move accounts over. That is no longer the case. You can now go ahead and enroll OUs that already exist into Control Tower directly. You can also, when you spin up Control Tower, customize the names of the log archiving OU and the security audit OU that are created at the beginning with the new Control Tower landing zone. And even better, the Control Tower accounts page used to only show OUs and accounts that were governed by Control Tower. It now shows you everything. So it gives you a pretty easy way to go in and make sure that everything that should be governed by Control Tower is. Now, last year, I had a bit of a bee in my bonnet about lack of CLI support. And there is a new feature in Control Tower, which, while it doesn't fix everything, while it doesn't give me everything that I asked for, does fix a lot of the main problems with that. Before, if you wanted to roll out Control Tower updates to your accounts, that either had to be done manually with each account or via scripting. But now you can do it by organizational unit. So for any OU that has 300 accounts or less in it, there is now a one-click button in the Control Tower console that allows you to roll out those updates across every account in the OU. So that means it ensures that the version of Control Tower is updated, and it also ensures that all of the guardrails are properly applied. So this is really important for making sure that you don't end up with drift in systems. Customizations for Control Tower was something that I hadn't looked at too much when I was playing around with last year, but as Control Tower has become a more compelling proposition, customizations has actually got a lot better too. There's been several bug fixes and general usability improvements, but the real big deal here is that Customizations version 2 actually introduced a simplified schema, so it's now much easier to set up resources using customizations if you want to. There have been a couple of security changes. Control Tower now automatically checks for drift against Control Tower service control policies. So those are not mandatory enforced guardrails, but those are detective guardrails effectively rather than preventive. That's now checked for you every day, and you can get reports of the results. You don't have to do that manually. Another good change security-wise is you used to have to use AWS managed keys for encrypting Control Tower's CloudTrail logs. And apparently that's got me on the wrong slide. Sorry about that. You used to have to use AWS managed keys for encrypting CloudTrail, but now you can bring your own. So you can use keys that are already existing, or you can create your own customer managed keys for that. So that's quite nice in terms of, you know, if you have policies already for managing keys, it allows you to manage that yourself. And another really good thing is if you absolutely dislike Control Tower and you decide that you want to get rid of it, you can now manually decommission Control Tower from within AWS. And this, again, is something that I did. And it used to require a support ticket and then a little bit of waiting for AWS to get back to you. So that's nice because it gives people the flexibility now to try it out. And if they don't like it, it's quite easy to roll back. There are also a few things that I talked about last year, though, that haven't changed. And the first one of these is the old chestnut of CLI support. Control Tower has improved quite a lot since I last looked at it, but it is still fundamentally a ClickOps tool. It's not something where you can go ahead and roll it out using the CLI, and it's not something where you can make changes and roll out updates using the CLI. So probably the one use case where I would be advising you to hold off on looking at Control Tower is large organizations that already have a lot of scripting and programmatic management of their account lifecycle process, because Control Tower introduces ClickOps steps to that. However, if you're in a smaller org, the bulk update feature actually quite effectively balances this out, because even though it is ClickOps, you're clicking one button per OU. There's no longer a lot of manual work that you have to do a lot of those updates. So it's still not there, but there is some mitigation there. The other thing that Control Tower doesn't have that I talked about last year is allowing you to actually create custom config rules and custom service control policies that are then managed by Control Tower. This isn't really a problem, though, because the ecosystem of automation has grown around Control Tower, and there are a lot of examples out there already that you can actually use and modify to have Control Tower lifecycle events manage custom guardrails if you want them. And you can do that with CloudFormation. It's still something that I hope to see Control Tower do at some point, because having everything managed in one place is really nice. But there are ways to do it yourself that are fairly trivial. It's a little bit of setup and then it's done. So one of the big questions here is, does this change the use cases? Because last year, Control Tower was bleeding edge software, and I, I sort of had a fairly niche list of recommendations. And I would really say that Control Tower works pretty well for everything except for, as I mentioned, large organizations. But I think there are some very good specific use cases here. So if you know that you're never going to need to create new AWS accounts, or you're unlikely to need new AWS accounts in the foreseeable future, Control Tower is a really compelling proposition because you can set up your landing zone and you can enroll everything in Control Tower and have Control Tower do a lot of the management for you. And all you need to worry about then is the Control Tower updates. And likewise, if you are in an organization that doesn't really have account creation processes, Control Tower is a really good piece of software or a really good service to use because it will basically give you an introductory, it'll give you a lot of those account creation processes out of the box. If you need to make major security improvements, Control Tower is really good for giving you a baseline around account setup that then allows you to go in and do some of the dirty work. So it gives you logs that are set up properly. It gives you a security audit account. You can then go in and set up other AWS services, things like GuardDuty, some of the other security services. And another good use case here is if you get audited a lot, and if you find audits really annoying, you can basically just, you can use the Control Tower documentation and basically say, yeah, this is what we do. So it saves you having to prove a lot of the work that you're doing. Another good scenario is if you have a cloud migration or a security overhaul that's being done by consultants. If you don't have a lot of people with specialized AWS knowledge in your organization, the learning curve for Control Tower is not that steep. So it's quite easy for consultants to come in and set this up. And then for staff who maybe have a bit less knowledge of AWS to maintain it. So that's a look at Control Tower 12 months on and a look at the continued adventures of Product Core as they enter the world of mergers and acquisitions. I'm assuming that we're going to have question time now, so throw them at me. And if you want to contact me later on, email addresses on the slides.
Thanks, Dawn. That was awesome. As always, your presentations are very, very in-depth. But they strike a good balance on telling a story and actually keeping it interesting. It's really good. We don't have any questions posted yet. Now is the time to post them anywhere you like. We will see them and we will ask them on your behalf. So while we're doing that... Nope, no one yet.
I don't see anything.
Was amazed while we're waiting that there is a whole different part of AWS that I've never touched, and that's to do with I've never had to go through an audit or any sort of compliance or anything like that, and just watching that makes me realize how little I know, which is not really surprising, I guess. But
yeah, it's a whole beast unto itself, and the fly money use case is one that I used here because I actually think it's quite interesting to look at how much I mean a lot of cloud providers, but AWS in particular, will do to help you with an audit, and how many places don't leverage that.
Yeah, I guess the more auditing and compliance tools you can use to your advantage, the easier the audits become.
Oh, absolutely. And particularly with PCI, sometimes you do wonder, like there are obviously companies that do this really well, and AWS will willingly abstract a lot of it away for you. But sometimes you do wonder, how much of that do people go in and manually do, or how much of it do they not do properly, and they don't, not even that they lie, but they don't realize.
Yeah, I could certainly see how ignorance could be a big part of this, because you just don't really know what you don't really know. Like if I had to sit down and do an audit at the moment, I would probably roll over and just cry for a while because I wouldn't even know where to start. But now I do start with Control Tower.
Yeah, it's actually not a bad starting point. It's definitely improved a lot since 12 months and change ago.
Yep, and as always with AWS, if they keep rolling out improvements, then it's only going to get better over time.
Yeah.
Okay, doesn't look like we've had any questions come in, but Dawn is always on Slack, or usually around somewhere on Slack if you do want to ask questions. And there was the contact details that you posted just a moment ago as well.
Yeah, and I'm sitting in the YouTube chat as well, so I will answer any other questions that are asked by text.
Cool. Thanks again, Dawn.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
Cheers. Okay, time for our second presentation. Matt, if you're ready to start your screen sharing. Matt has taken a screenshot of the chat instead of sharing his screen. I'm sure that's exactly what he wanted to do. So while we wait for Matt to find the screen share button, Matt is currently a cloud consultant for Civo, one of our sponsors here in Melbourne. He spent the last 7 years helping organizations solve their business problems using AWS. He has too many AWS certifications. Or if you asked him, he probably can't even lift them all anymore. But in his spare time, he writes workshops to teach people how to use new and interesting AWS services. So time for a look at a new, I don't know, is it a new? An interesting AWS service either way. Newish. If I can find the button, we'll switch over to Matt.
Excellent, thank you for that. So, welcome to the second presentation for this evening, a look at a smarter contact center experience with Voice ID and Wisdom. So, before we get started, most of you will already know who I am, or at least have a rough idea. As Rob mentioned, I'm an AWS cloud consultant at Civo. Been doing AWS pretty much since it landed in Australia back in the dim dark ages. Currently, really hating the idea of the SAP on AWS certification. I have all of the other ones, so it's kind of I really need to go and learn SAP. If I want to keep on having all of them, but this is what you do. And yeah, when not playing with AWS, you can normally find me tinkering, getting into the whole IoT, computer vision, and all of those sorts of things, and have just commenced building my own R2D2. So if anybody wants to have a chat to me about that at some stage, more than happy to have a little bit of a talk. Going through what I sort of wanted to cover off this afternoon, or this evening now, wanted to sort of have a quick look at Amazon Connect as it stands in October 2021. Amazon Connect is a very fast-moving service, particularly over the last 18 months. So have a look at some of the new features and functionality that AWS have added. Then we'll take a little bit of a look into Voice ID and Wisdom, two new features that have been in preview for a while and were recently made general availability. So take a look at what they can do for us as far as making our contact center experience a little better for our callers. And then just wrap out the session with some ideas and places that people can go if they want to learn more information, want to get started and play with these services for themselves. So without all of that out of the way, we can sort of jump into the first bit, which is Amazon Connect as of October 2021. So, quick 30-second recap for those of you who aren't aware. What is Amazon Connect? So, Amazon Connect is AWS's omni-channel cloud contact center solution. Think inbound, outbound, call center type capability, but focused more on providing end user functionality. We can self-service a lot of things. We can integrate with other capabilities, including chat bots and those sorts of things. We've got full voice and chat capability. I really like the service because it is purely consumption-based billing. You want five inbound phone numbers, you pay for 5 inbound phone numbers. You want You only handle 5 minutes of calls a month. That's all you pay for. You can have a lot of power at your fingertips for very little. And then obviously being an AWS managed service natively integrates with a lot of the other capabilities and systems that AWS have available. So we've got Lex and Poly and Lambda. We can integrate back into our databases. We can pull in step functions and all of those sorts of other services to really augment and flesh out the experience that a caller would get if they ring into our environment. So with that, what has AWS added to the service of recent? One of the big bugbears that Amazon Connect has sort of had is they broke their own pattern. Amazon Connect for the longest of time has really struggled from a lack of API availability. If you wanted to automate a lot of the provisioning and management of the different components of an Amazon Connect instance, you kind of had to resort to hacking it together using Selenium or Pioneer or one of those sort of screen interaction mechanisms. And recently they've been doing a lot of work to start exposing a lot more APIs to make not only your ability to deploy and configure these environments, but also interact with them in an ongoing manner. So that's been really good to see. The other thing that's been a big one is the ability to generate tasks and EventBridge events. Much like Dawn mentioned around Control Tower, when you've got the ability to capture and interact with events being generated in EventBridge, the world kind of becomes your oyster in a lot of ways, because you can then, if functionality is missing for whatever reason, you can flesh it out yourself. So this is a big one to really add a lot of additional capabilities to environments. The third one is high volume outbound communication. So this is an interesting one and probably not overly relevant to a lot of people, but they're really integrating a lot of high volume, high throughput capabilities when integrating with things like Pinpoint and those other, customer interaction type services. Now this is currently in preview, but is available to if you need it. But the two we're actually going to look at today are Voice ID and Wisdom. As I mentioned before, both services that have recently become general availability and, in my opinion, offer the greatest bang for buck when it comes to the amount of effort it would take to get these integrated into an environment, into an instance, versus the amount of value that they can provide an organization. The other bits that they've recently released, great, fantastic, but a lot of them are all very heavy on a lot of custom development effort, whereas Voice ID and Wisdom, with minimal effort, you can get up and running, with no code and, a couple of hours worth of effort. So starting off with Voice ID. What is Amazon Connect Voice ID? So Amazon Connect Voice ID provides real-time caller authentication and fraud risk detection, which makes voice interactions in contact centers more secure and efficient. That is the official AWS definition, taken straight out of the Administrator Guide for Amazon Connect. What does that actually mean? Ultimately, this is a way to identify inbound callers based off their voice print. So it uses machine learning algorithms in the back end in order to take a voice print of a caller, attach that back to the customer's identification or the customer's ID in your CRM. And then when they call in on subsequent interactions, Connect can actually match that voice pattern against what's on file and confirm whether or not it's the same person. It also has a fraud detection capability. You can run blacklists, whereby we can identify and register known fraudulent callers, and then this will enable us to very rapidly identify these if they're calling in pretending to be somebody they're not. So two very slightly different use cases, but very powerful in what they can do. So how does it work? Because obviously, in order to be able to match a voice print to someone, well, first of all, we need to capture it. So we obviously need to enroll users into the system. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. We can import previous recordings and voice prints into the system if we happen to have those on file already. But more often than not, we're probably going to want to build in some kind of enrollment mechanism. So the easiest way to do that is we will obviously have our current system. So maybe we're asking a customer for, their customer number and their PIN. And when we get through to the agent, the customer's already sort of provided two mechanisms of identification. We might want to ask some additional forms, some additional questions, just to be confident that we are 100% sure that is the person they say they are. At which point in time, the agent can actually just click a single button in the CCP to enroll that caller into the system. Now, the system does need about 30 seconds of voice sample in order to be able to build that voice print, but that can come from the previous interactions and the previous discussion, previous voice they've used during that interaction. Once that's done, it will notify the agent that the voice print has been taken, and then that will record it against that customer's ID going forwards. What that then means is on subsequent future calls, what we need is about 10 seconds. You can go as low as 5, but results may vary, worth of voice. So potentially you could actually grab the customer's voice sample if you're using some kind of Lex IVR, in a few brief words, tell me the reason for your call today. You may be able to capture enough voice in those interactions to be able to identify the user, or it may need to be when the caller starts interacting with the agent. And again, the agent in the CCP will be able to see when that user is authenticated and confirmed. If for whatever reason it comes up as, not confident, or isn't able to make a match, obviously, we can then have the additional mechanisms. We might have the agent ask them an additional security question. So this is meant as just an additional mechanism that we can use to identify people. The nice bit is once the user's been authenticated, we can then handle that. The agent can see that, but we can also then use that within the system. So when we're talking for an agent, an agent will see that the voice ID has been authenticated and that person is in fact who they say they are, and then they can use that to guide their interactions with the user going forward. On the other hand, if we want to be a little bit smarter about it, we can actually leverage the state within the call flow itself. So there is a branch mechanism whereby we can check the voice ID for authentication and then branch off the call flow based on the results of that. Obviously, we can handle inconclusive or not enrolled states, pass those through to agents for additional checks, or we can provide more information for those that have already sort of passed the check. The other thing we can do is put fraud detection in our call flows as well. So if the system thinks that there's a higher risk that it's potentially a fraudulent call, we might automatically pass that through to an agent, whereas if it's a low risk or deemed as a low risk, then we can pass that through to the automated system. So it kind of gives us the way to sort of direct the interaction depending on the confidence score that Voice ID will provide. Now, we can set and change the thresholds as to what we want that confidence level to be. By default, it's 90% confidence, but all I will say is experiment with that one. Particularly if you're looking to sort of drop the number of seconds needed to make that initially distinction, that initial decision of whether or not or who the user is. And if you're going to drop that, then you might want to sort of increase the confidence level or vice versa. But it's all sort of in the hands of yourself when you're configuring up and making your call flows. So if you wanted to get started with Voice ID, I did mention that it's a relatively easy service to get started with, sort of what's involved. The answer is not a lot, really. Well, at least not a lot from the technical side. You do need to, obviously, we are talking about running machine learning across the voice prints of our callers. So there are some acknowledgements and some understanding that we've got to accept. We've got to understand the implications that come with that sort of activity. But once we sort of, consent to the retrieval and capture of the machine learning data, all we really need to do is create ourselves a domain where Connect will store the voice prints. It's as simple as just giving it a name. This is done at the tenant level. And then once we've done that, we will get some new options in our call flows. When we're designing our call flows, we will now be able to set our voice ID. This is the mechanism whereby we tell Amazon Connect to actually start listening for that voice in order to do the analysis on it. The official AWS documentation recommends that you put your set voice ID as early in your call flow as possible, with the exception that you probably want to be playing audio to the caller first, just in case there's a slight delay in enabling and setting the voice ID. They're not just sitting there with an empty channel, not hearing anything. So typically you might have your initial, play prompt, set your logging or whatever, and then you'd have, your set voice ID.
I think we just lost Matt then. He has frozen in my Skype window and gone silent, so we'll see if he comes back. This is where I wish we had some hold music and technical difficulties screen. Oh, just disconnected from the call. That's probably a good sign. Fingers crossed Matt's computer hasn't bought something from my computer and over Skype. One bout of involuntary macOS updates a night is probably enough. Hey, he's back again. If you're ready to reshare your screen and pick up where you left off. That's the one. All right, I will switch back over to you now.
Yep. So sorry about that. Internet isn't always as reliable as we would like it. But yeah, so we can sort of set our voice ID, set our confidence level, define what we want those levels to be, whether or not we want to be doing fraud detection, all of those sorts of things, and then confirm what our customer ID would be. Not sure exactly where it's sort of cut off in the feed. But here's sort of where we're going to want the checks and balances against. We might call out to the CRM, have a Lambda function to sort of look up the custom number, pass that in, and then that's going to be the mechanism that Voice ID uses to confirm the voice print. Once we do that, then we can continue passing the call through to an agent or any other additional automated call flows that we might have. If we want the agents to be able to see whether or not a caller has been authenticated using Voice ID, we are going to need to set the security profile of those agents. There is simply just the little checkbox under the contact control panel, just to say that that security profile has the ability to see that information. And that's it. If we enable our Voice ID in at the tenant level, we enable our set Voice ID in our call flow, and we give the agent the ability to see Voice ID, then the CCP will update, and the agents now have that additional piece of information at their disposal to help guide the interactions they have with customers. From there, you could literally just start with that. Give the agents the additional piece of information, and then over time look to add additional levels of automation. You could, fine-tune the confidence levels, the confidence scores. You can fine-tune how many seconds of voice you need in order to make the identification without causing any real impact to your callers. So what does it cost? We're talking machine learning here. We're talking a whole heap of, smarts in the back end. Surely it is expensive, and it kind of is, I guess. We're sort of talking 2.5 cents US per transaction. Now, a transaction is basically a call into the system. So 2.5 cents per call, which isn't a lot of money. But if you're handling, hundreds or thousands of calls a day, obviously that will add up pretty quickly. But ultimately, in the big scheme of things, when we're talking large-scale contact centers, the amount of benefit that you're going to get and the amount of additional confidence you can have in the identification of your callers, it's probably worth the investment. Just as a little bit of an example, again, taken from the AWS documentation, if we enroll 10,000 callers, I mentioned before, we can, pull in the recordings if we happen to already have them. And then we sort of had 500 callers a day. Well, that's 31 times 500 plus the initial 10,000 is sort of 25,500 interactions. At 2.5 cents, we're sort of talking $600. Now, $600 a month can be considered a whack of money, but when we're sort of handling what is effectively 15,000 calls a month, that can be considered a good investment. Now, that's sort of identifying our callers, but how do we help them once we've confirmed who they are? And that's where the second service that's recently been released comes in, and that is Connect Wisdom. So Connect Wisdom, again, taken from the official AWS definition. Amazon Connect Wisdom, a feature of Amazon Connect, delivers agents the information they need, reducing the time spent searching for answers. Today, knowledge articles, wikis, and FAQs are spread across multiple separate repositories. This is all about surfacing the information we already have within our organization to the agents to make it easier for them to find the information that the callers are looking for. That is all we are talking about here. So we could potentially be talking about having information stored in our wiki or in our Salesforce instance or any one of a number of different locations. And we don't really want the agents having to jump between this system and that system and going, where do I find that article? All while the call is sitting on the other end of the line going, well, I thought this was a simple inquiry. So this is all just about making it a little bit easier, a little bit faster, a little bit simpler for the agent to find the information the caller is wanting so that we can turn that inquiry around as quickly as possible. So how does it work? Well, really what we need to do, there's two components here. The first one is if we want the system to automatically be making recommendations and automatically trying to find articles and FAQs for us, then we're going to need the system to be able to make recommendations. And to do that, we need Connect listening to the call so that it can do a little bit of pattern matching and then look up those articles in the Wisdom knowledge base. then the call comes through, or as those recommendations are identified through the interactions the agent's having with the caller, those will be presented in the CCP to the agent, and they can browse through them, select the right ones, and follow the instructions. If a recommendation can't be provided, if we don't want to be listening into the call in order to drive these sorts of things, then the CCP simply presents the agent with a search mechanism where the agent can simply then just interact with the caller and then just use the simple search functionality and pull it up all within the contact control panel. So they're not having to alt tab and move into other applications. So they're getting a lot of the same benefit. They're not just getting that additional step of having the system automatically look up articles and documents for them. There are some caveats in enabling the recommendations, which I'll get to in a little bit, that may drive the decisions about whether or not you want to be enabling recommendations. It can get pretty pricey. That's sort of the big problem here. So here's the thing. So this is just sort of an example of what it might look like for an agent. This is the new version of the contact control panel. We've got our standard Connect controls over on the left-hand side. Our calls will come in on the top left, and then our Wisdom instance will simply recommend the relevant articles, the relevant web pages, documents, or the like, to the agent that they can then open up and leverage. So there's not a lot to it. We want to keep it as simple as we can, but it sort of brings the information that the agent's going to need front and center. So how do we sort of get started with this? Because obviously, there could be a lot in trying to surface data within an organization. And to get started with Wisdom, you'll notice that it's actually a pretty similar pattern to getting started with Voice ID. The first thing we've got to do is enable Wisdom at the Amazon Connect tenant level. We've got to add a domain. Obviously, we will be ingesting a bunch of information from throughout the organization: WordPress websites, static websites, documents on a file share, our Salesforce instance, our ServiceNow instance. So we need sort of somewhere for Connect to store a lot of that information, and that's going to be the domain. So we come in, we enable Wisdom, and we create a domain for it to store the info. Once we've done that, we need to set up an integration. We need to tell it where to pull the information from. And if you follow the bouncing ball in the web UI, it's as simple as creating a new integration and then selecting the source from the drop-down list. And then we simply go through, mark the relevant data, and it will then start the process of ingesting the data into the domain. But AWS said that we could use knowledge articles, wikis, and FAQs that are spread across the organization, spread across different repositories. So why is only Salesforce and ServiceNow available in the drop-down list? And the answer to that is pretty simple. They're the two that they managed to get working in the web interface on launch. However, we can pull in other information. Almost any information we want. We've just got to use the CLI. There are two components in the CLI that we're going to want to use in order to get other sources of data into the system. The first few are AWS Wisdom commands, where we're going to want to create an assistant and a knowledge base. This is just creating the components in the back end for the domain. We want to create the assistant, and we want to create the knowledge base where it's going to store the actual data. We then want to create an association between the assistant and the knowledge base so that we can tie the data to the metadata. That then creates sort of the Wisdom component and makes that ready to ingest the data. What we're then going to need to do is take that and connect that into our Connect instance. And so we're going to need to run to AWS Connect, and we're going to create integration associations, and we need to create one integration association for each of the components that we made. So we need to create one for the assistant and one for the knowledge base. Once we do that, that then gives us a nice capability to ingest and populate data. Now, the caveat here is, well, the next logical question then becomes, how do we get data into the system? And I've put a link here to a blog article on the AWS website that sort of goes through the steps that we, or a step that we can do to manage this, whereby we can simply just upload files into an S3 bucket and have them automatically ingested into the system through the use of a Lambda function and an S3 event trigger. As we add and remove files to the S3 bucket, the Lambda function will add and remove those artifacts from the Wisdom knowledge base. It is a little involved, but it is a relatively quick process. In the testing that I've done over the last sort of week or two, it seems pretty flexible in the types of data that it can ingest. I've been pretty brutal and manipulative with it as far as, web pages and all of those sorts of things, and it seems to do a pretty good job of ingesting it. And the search is pretty capable of sort of working through the relevant tags in the documents. So I highly advise, if this is something that might be valuable, you can take a look at the blog article at the bottom of the screen. I mentioned before that there's some additional things that we need to do if we want recommendations, and the big one there is that we need to enable contact lens. Contact lens gives us some additional machine learning capabilities around the analytics and analysis of the calls while they're in flight, and to be able to get the information into Wisdom that we need in order for it to do the recommendations, we need contact lens enabled, and there are additional costs in having that enabled and leveraging that in our calls. So not only are we looking at the Wisdom charges, but we're also looking at the contact lens charges as well. And we can sort of see that here. Whoops, I haven't changed the heading of the slide. That was very slack of me. But effectively, what we need to do is there's two components here. Obviously, we have our welcome prompt, much like we did for our set voice ID. And the first thing we want to do is sort of set the recording and analytics behavior. This is where we can tell the call flow that we want to enable and interact with the contact lens. And this is where we start recording the call and doing the analytics across it. Now, we also need to enable real-time analysis or real-time analytics against the call, which just adds to the cost a little bit, but does give us a lot of these additional capabilities. Once we've got contact lens enabled, once we've got the recordings enabled, then we simply need to tell the call flow which domain we want to be interacting with. We might have multiple domains. If we think of a bank as an example, we might have a domain for personal banking and a different domain for business banking, or we might have one domain for home loans versus a different domain for credit cards. So if we want to carve out our data different ways, we can have different domains, and then as we sort of fork the call out, we can sort of direct Wisdom to which domain it should be doing the lookups and the searches against. And that's it. Once we have that, again, we can handle the call. However we need to, and once it's presented through to the agent in the CCP, it will be visible. ... Assuming, again, we come back into our security profile, much like we did for our voice ID, we are adding additional capability to the contact control panel. We need to give the agents the ability to access and interact with that. Typically, we would just need the agent to have view rights. So it's just a matter of there's a new section in the CCP security profiles under agent applications, and we can just tick the view option for Wisdom, save that against our agent security profile, and have the users log out and log back in. And once they do that, when they get inbound calls, they will be presented with the relevant information. So here's just an example screenshot taken from the AWS documentation. We can see here, the customers sort of called in. We can see their phone number on the left there, like I said before. We've got access to the customer profile. Haven't spoken about that today, but that is an additional mechanism that was released earlier this year around managing customer information. We can see the recommended articles, the recommended documents that Wisdom has got open for the agent. And on the right-hand side there, we've still got the agent with the ability to do additional searching for relevant articles within the domain. They can then follow the information on the screen, direct the user accordingly. Maybe that is, passing them off to a different quick connect, to a different queue, a different set of agents, or perhaps just providing them with the required information. So what does this cost? Wisdom is Wisdom is a little bit more expensive than Voice ID. We're actually talking 4 cents per contact. Now, a contact is an interaction. So again, if we assume that we have 10,000 contacts in which Wisdom is enabled in a month, so 10,000 inbound calls, for example, then we'd be talking sort of $400. So a little bit more expensive than Voice ID, but depending on the state of your data and how easy it is to get it into a mechanism that can be ingested by Wisdom, could be valuable to your agents. You can always enable it, get started, see how it goes, and go from there, because again, the impact or the potential negative impact to a caller is very minimal. So it sort of gives you the option to trial it, see how it goes, and sort of go from there. But you can sort of see how these prices can start running away from you. I mentioned before that contact lens needs to be on if you want to do analytics and have the recommendations come up. That's another couple of cents. So if we're sort of putting contact lens plus Voice ID plus Wisdom, all of a sudden, we're starting to add 8-9 cents per call to our inbound handling. So the costs do start to add up. But it ultimately, it's just a matter of what sort of functionality we're looking for, and that's the really powerful thing about Connect is we don't need to be turning all of these on for every interaction. We might only have Wisdom coming in for some call flows, and we might be using Voice ID for other call flows, and we can sort of pick and choose and sort of break them out as required. So. Gone a little bit over thanks to our little internet dropout issue there, but just sort of wanted to leave people with a couple of reference points if they want to do a little bit more investigation or trial Amazon Connect for themselves. The first one there is the Amazon Connect code snippets repository, and if you're doing any work with Amazon Connect, highly recommend you take a look at that repository. It's just full of various snippets, code examples, reference CLI commands around common use cases, common activities, common interactions. So it can save you a lot of time. The second one is my own GitHub, where I've got a bunch of various repositories I've mentioned earlier. I spend a lot of time writing workshops for people on getting started with various AWS services, and I've got a number of Amazon Connect workshops there, from getting started, setting up your first Connect instance, all the way through to some I'm just in the process at the moment of finalizing a workshop for setting up Wisdom and Connect. So if you want a little bit more of a detailed step-by-step how-to, then you'll find that on my GitHub in the coming days. And then the last one, if you want more of it's a little bit less of a deep dive, but more of a broad. So we sort of go broad rather than deep. AWS have actually put together a fairly decent, a pretty good Connect introductory workshop that's available there. And this sort of goes through the basics of getting some core flows up and running, goes through the process of setting up hours of operation for your agents, getting a chatbot working with Lex, and a few other sort of IVR type activities. So a good starting point if you've never sort of worked with an IVR or a contact center or anything like that before. And with that, that is it. So what have we got? We do have one question. Does AWS give any legal guarantees around authenticated voices, i.e. if you're... Yeah.
Cool. So, yep. Thanks for that, Matt. That was wonderful as always. To be honest, I'm still a bit shocked that Connect of all services has something where you can do more with CLI than with the actual console after so long it being a pure ClickOps service. But that's good to see. And as you already, so I'll say we've got one question from some guy named Rob.
Never heard of him.
No, I know. Must be some random person just jumping in here. Does AWS give any legal guarantees around authenticated voices? E.g., if you're my bank and somehow spoof my voice, is there any legal recourse?
Not that I am aware of. I did mention that there are some agreements you've got to go and read through, and all I will say about those, so like hashtag not a lawyer, but you probably got to be one to truly understand some of those agreements. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's probably not a lot of recourse, given the way they're worded. But yeah, my recommendation would be, spin yourself up a Connect instance, go and have a look at the agreements, and make that interpretation.
Cool. Thank you. I don't see any other questions coming in. So you've actually done a good job in already preventing any questions I was going to ask around how do you see this working. So I guess we're leaving it at this, and I will just thank you again for a good, interesting talk.
Always happy to present on these things. And as I say, for those that want, a sort of a more in-depth, how do we get started step by step, the workshop will be up on GitHub in a few days. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And then back to Rob.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. You could dump repost the link when the workshop is posted on Slack. I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate that. Connect is something that I never really got a chance to play with, but I kind of wish I do because it looks very cool. I remember my old days of building Asterisk servers. That was terrible. This looks much better. All right, let's wrap up for the night. Which side are my slides on? No, this way. All right, so our next event is 90% Day on the 24th of November, 2021, so the last Wednesday of November. As I said before, we won't really take a risk on actually hitting that target and being able to do something in person. I'm sure our venue probably wouldn't want to take a risk on that either. So we will have this one in virtually, and then we will look forward to being able to catch up in person again in the new year. A big thanks again to our sponsors, CMD, Versant, and Civo, for their support throughout this year. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next month.